Although a defining COVID movie, Failed State is nevertheless first a film about a failed state. This micro-budget indie shot guerrilla style across various NYC locations, follows a delivery driver, and shows how capitalism deemed working people like him essential in name only during the lockdown. Meet Dale, a middle-aged Jesus-looking guy who makes like $20K a year and looks the part because the actor's reality is not that far from the character's. He lives alone, overworks himself in a job that he's decreasingly able to do, and the work in turn gets more absurd and alienating. Chris Bell and Mitch Blummer's fourth collaboration neither sugarcoats Dale's struggle nor romanticizes it as tragedy, with a third act that taps into the abstract to show the ways that the state fails Dale. Failed State joins fellow 2024 films such as Andrea Arnold's Bird and Payal Kapadia's All We Imagine as Light in turning towards surrealism for resolution. More than its craft though, Failed State impresses you with its soul. Dale is a real guy, and the filmmakers care that he is. You're rooting for a man being ground into paste by the machine, and the film holds itself and you accountable for bearing witness.
I was born in 85, so I really wanted like a VHS camera or something like that. I could never get it. Eventually, as mini DV and stuff hit the market, I acquired camera through friends, and were doing sketch comedy, no production value. I think we had a sketch where it was like supposed to be a farmland, a rural pastoral area, and we just did it in my room, and everything was fake. So it was this weird accidental surrealism we were doing, and just totally committed. I carried the sensibilities of that type of filmmaking with me to this day. Yeah, I just wanted to learn. I was like, oh, I should learn how to do this properly. So I went to school for it, and then didn't have any money when I graduated. Was in a lot of debt. So yeah, I had to keep making films in that way, trying to find how to do something that was aesthetically pleasing and exciting to me while making do with what I had. And that led to collaborations with actors or, non-studied actors. And I met Mitch at a screening series that our mutual friend created, and I was programming for a year and a half or so. And then we shot something together called Trammel, which also has Dale. It was love at first sight.
We just finished our fourth project, which is the last two have been slight departure from the first two, which is awesome to keep evolving from that stuff. But yeah, I think I first got into making moving images through skateboarding. That's what put a camera in my hand initially. Just making really kind of like lame videos with my friends in middle school and high school. And then also like us like wanting to be Viva La Bam and like just jumping off stuff and like doing like really lame pranks. But it became apparent to me like as I was kind of learning how to edit, these like this horrible footage that we had, that really like cinema and moving image making in general is really like it's kind of a means of time travel in a way, and being able to relive the same moment over and over again and stretch time and compress time. And that's what really appealed to me even at a young age. Before I, had any kind of philosophy behind it. And then at a certain point, I kind of discovered cinema and auteur cinema and different, filmmakers, and kind of really got interested in movie making. I also went to film school. And since then, I've been, just trying to work. I do a lot of commercial work and, TV work as well. And just trying to make as many independent film projects as I can get my hands on, and collaborate with people like Chris, and just keep making movies with stories and missions that I am aligned with and care about. I was doing like a film for like a restaurant last couple of days, which was actually kind of fun, and these guys were, they're really artists with the food. This is, some high-end kind of culinary stuff. But and so it's interesting, but it's also just like, what am I doing here, you know? And so, but doing those kinds of projects enable us to work on the projects like this, which are really a labor of love.
The skateboarding films, especially, like reminded me of Gus Van Sant's Paranoid Park. And I was like, I would never trivialize skateboarding movies because I think like it really is like such a microcosm of American culture that's like, honestly, I feel like it's even now underexplored and things like that. And there's so many good movies, great, even iconic films that came out that involve skateboarding. So, with respect to that, as well as like Chris, the thing that you said about how filmmaking constraints or like some sort of constraints like that actually kind of tilted you towards surrealism. I think both of those are like really interesting aspects, which I feel like are even very present in failed state.
Something like Paranoid Park was definitely kind of on the tail end of like the influences that I was getting from skateboarding. I mean, and there's obviously a number of narrative films that involve skateboarding and are centered around that culture, which are interesting. And I mean, I'm kind of talking even more about just like pure skate videos, like 411 Video Magazine and Yeah Right, and any Alien Workshop film from the late 90s, early 2000s, like that's the kind of stuff. Because now you got Paranoid Park, you got mid 90s, and skateboarding has kind of become commercialized, and it's in the Olympics and Nike, and it's completely transformed from the stuff that we were doing as kids, which was just literally like a really crappy high-8 camera running around in parking lots and getting kicked out and just causing trouble. To your point though, and it's interesting that you say that, failed state really was tapping into, I think, some of the same energy where we're all over the city. I'm following Dale around to different spots. We're looking for cinematic opportunities on any given street corner. And that to me does speak to the spirit of like kind of making skateboard films, which is this, like, you're out in the world and exploring and you don't know where you're going to go. And you're just, every day it takes you a little bit further away from home. This is Dale's daily life, is, being out there pounding the pavement and going to just an address that somebody gives him, and that was kind of one of the more exciting things about this project to me, was also just like being in such a live environment, not really having, I mean, and there were days that were planned and we, would stage things and be really intentional with scenes, but there were days where I was just following him and just going where the flow of the day took us. And that definitely kind of spoke to that.
I was very into Kids in the Hall, sketch comedy. Jackass came out of like CKY videos, and I don't know if they all skated, but a lot of them did. So that
was definitely
like
super connected to that, same with the Viva La Bam stuff. It was like this kind of misfit, like kind of causing trouble culture that was connected to skateboarding. But yeah.
Yeah, that was really influential, even to like my friends who didn't get into filmmaking in any way would pick up a camera, we would screw around and start doing that. And Tom Green was really, once his show premiered on MTV, that was very influential for me and my friends group to go out and do something. And it's funny, we can talk about movies that we got into a little later in teenhood and in college and what that influenced, but I can't discount the credit of skate videos and how that became like, oh, okay, so now we're watching Jackass, we're watching like these kind of like DIY anarchic spirit, and that's every kid who had a camera was jumping off the roof and stuff like that. Or Tom Green, not that there weren't prank videos or prank calls before that, but everyone in suburbia bored getting a camera and bothering the other townspeople for stuff that wasn't very funny. But how those were like, that's the foundation, and how does that end up becoming intertwined with a diet of how to do things the proper way, how to light, how to direct, how to block, and all that stuff, and including art cinema. When I was in high school, I knew again that I wanted to study and learn more about this thing, but I liked, Canon-ish films like Train Spotting, Mulholland Drive, Donnie Darko. Those three were big, and I revisit those three, and I still really love those three, and I find new things in them now that I'm older and wiser. Barely, but I am. Um, but those were instrumental, and then going to college and actually studying this art form and finding like Darden Brothers, Michael Haneke, Chantal Ackerman, that kind of thing, all like gets infused. So it's interesting to start at like sketch comedy, learn ways of working and working with people and working with the image and the frame, and then taking that and going like, okay, well, here's a film where the camera doesn't move and things, there's this tension created, there's this disconnect. You're learning about Brecht, you're learning about alienation, all these techniques and how do they combine. And it's a weird little ball of influences that, ended up affecting the art we make.
Another big one for me was like Harmony Korine, was going straight out of that. I mean, that's almost like a direct reference is of with kids. And then, the reason I actually discovered him was in his first directorial film, Gummo. The reason I even know about that film is because I was just, I would just spend hours just cruising IMDb and just going from film to film, link to link. And I found that one of my favorite skateboarders, this guy, Mark Gonzalez, was in a movie called Gummo by this guy, Harmony Korine. And I hadn't seen Kids at the time. And I was like, well, what is this? And, the only information I could find on it was that he wrestles a chair in it. And it's like, okay, that's extremely abstract. And I don't even know what that means. And then you watch the film and it's like, that's exactly what it is. It's just him wrestling a chair. And but it has that kind of same loose spirit and just like this exploration to it and in a sense of place. And but then you kind of fuse that with a 16 millimeter camera and some actual artistic inclinations and amazing performers also. I mean, Chloe Sevigny is in that, and like I said, Mark Gonzalez and a bunch of other, there is that fusion between those cultures. And I think that it was also just a time when it was before everybody had a 4K camera in their pocket, that you really still had to be intentional about like seeking out a camera and going out and trying to make images. And and I think the democratization of filmmaking and moving image making is great, but the people who would actually intentionally seek that out, I think that there was a different kind of spirit to that.
Chris, you brought up the Darden brothers, and even talking about Harmony Korine, Larry Clark, etc. Emphasis on non-actors, which is like a huge fundamental aspect of neorealism from the beginning, and how like that also becomes a hallmark of working class cinema. And I think like that's one of the things that made me instantly like your movie, like fall in love with the film, is because of Dale. I feel like he's at once extremely familiar and also extremely alien to the viewer. Like everybody's seen somebody like Dale, but also nobody knows anybody like Dale truly. Like you don't really get to the bottom of who this person is. And I think like even by the end of the film, like there's so much about him that we don't really even understand, let alone know. Or actually, you should say it the other way, I suppose, like that we don't even know, let alone understand. From what I understand, this is not the first time that you're working with Dale. So tell me a little bit about Dale. How did you meet him? Who is he, and how did you start working with Dale?
Dale, I met on a shoot. He was doing background work, and it was a shoot that I found out about because I was on the Arrested Development fan group on MySpace, and the page admin was producing a short film, and I think, in my first year of college. This was an NYU production. I think it might have been a grad program too. Anyway, I was like, oh, I should go and see how, other people make films, because I was just making films in class with classmates. So I agreed. I responded to the background actor call, and I met Dale. And can't forget Dale. He was very memorable. And 2 years later, I was ACing on a short film. I met Dale again. A few years later, he was on set again. I just really kept seeing him. I ended up casting him in a film I was producing for a friend. And the whole time I was kind of thinking of Dale reminded me of my childhood. I was raised by my grandparents in this small town in New Jersey that kind of felt like a weird Midwestern
Well, I remember a
suburban
couple of years
town,
back, I
kind
went to the
of
zoo and I saw the
everybody knows
craziest
everyone's
thing.
business. There's all
Yeah,
these like weird
we were walking around,
characters,
and
and
you know, a
Dale
couple of friends of mine were walking around. Then all of a
reminded
sudden,
me of that, of
we're
a
checking out this
person that
gorilla,
you would
and the
assume
gorilla starts picking
you would
its
see
nose.
more of in
And
cinema,
I'm
like a
going
working
like,
class,
what the hell?
real
It
textured
picks its nose and
person,
basically
and you don't.
it eats it,
And I was thinking,
and then it turns around,
okay,
it takes
well,
its finger,
you could write
goes
a
up
story
its,
around him.
and then it,
It'd be
what?
pretty interesting,
And I'm going like,
it would be
what
something
the
that you
hell?
don't
I said, I came to
see.
the zoo for this.
And then eventually we ended
And
up
then we're
doing a
walking
few short
around and we
films
see two
together,
lions having sex, and I'm
Mitch
going
had
like,
shot
what the hell is
the
going on
second
here?
one,
What kind of
Trammell,
zoo are you in?
Yeah, I said,
which
is this
did
like,
fairly well in the
what is this,
festival
Masters of
circuit.
Sex or something? What's up with this?
And I was trying to write a bunch of different things for Dale, and in my head, I wanted to do one that was just a documentary following him around on his job, which is being a delivery person, like a messenger service. And I was supposed to shoot something else. COVID happened. First year of COVID was very depressing, and I couldn't even cast the thing I was going to do. And Mitch was out of work, running around shooting just to pass the time. And Dale was still working because he was mostly outside and people were mostly getting delivery stuff. And that made me wonder if we could possibly do something together. And I had looked at an idea and asked Mitch and Dale if they would be down to see if we had something, just shoot something. Mitch can follow him around for a day, not interfere, just see like if there's any potential here. We'd review the footage.
Rewinding just a little bit, yeah, my first collaboration with Dale was with Chris on Trammell, which was the short film. I think Chris, you had done one short film with him before. Trammell, I think, really got into.
So, you get your little severance
Dale's main
package,
strength,
you get
which
your
is
stuff,
just
and that'll
like
last you
that
for
he
another
Chris would
year or
just give
two,
him a
probably.
topic, basically.
Job-wise, it
and
wasn't
he'd
much
be
after
like,
that, so after a while, you
or
go
whatever,
into debt.
and then be able to still
And
talk
now
about
the
it
house
for,
is in
10,
foreclosure,
15
so,
minutes and just say really kind of out of pocket.
It was
funny
my
stuff.
sister told me, when I did it, you should
And I had
have
a ton
done
of fun
that.
on that project.
But
Of
you know
course, that
what?
was me
She
and
made
Chris's first
mistakes.
kind
I
of
make
formal
mistakes.
collaboration.
Life's full of mistakes.
And super proud of the film. So when COVID was happening, there was no work in production. I was shooting some stuff for fun. Like Chris said, like I was kind of doing this like nightcrawler lifestyle of like going to murder scenes and like fires in the middle of the night to like get footage and sell it on this app, which was an adventure. I mean, we were all just trying to stay active during COVID. I was in the middle of Brooklyn, and there was nothing to do, and so I was just kind of looking for my next mission. And so then, Chris came along with this, and I was like, yeah, of course I'm down. Kind of jumped into it, and I had known Dale from our small collaboration on Trammell, which was only I think two or 3 days. And I mean, after a couple of days of kind of this exploratory style of shooting, of just like kind of going out and following him around, I felt like there was something there. And just the backdrop of the visual effects that COVID had on New York during this peak period of early mid 2020 and into 2022, and that was the whole period that we were shooting this thing. It legitimized the project even more because it felt like we were capturing like a piece of history as well, and I think that also kind of compelled me to it. And Dale's attitude about it, I think, was also really kind of emblematic and an important perspective to have, because there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of unsurety, and Dale was just day by day out doing his normal thing, riding the subway, surviving, doing his thing, and he was also being kind of looked at as like this essential worker. He felt like he was, at least. And this is something that we talk a little bit about in the film, but it's also kind of a between the lines subtext thing. and he, you know, in his way would kind of just shrug that off and you know, just be doing his daily life one way or another, you know. And he was not afraid, and he was, you know, kind of thought everybody else was being silly. And I think that that's a perspective that you know, in a way holds up, and you know, he was really kind of original with that, you know.
Thinking also about the way of using COVID as a backdrop as something that really struck me is there was a filmmaker, Nagisa Oshima from Japan, who's known for Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, and then another one which I'm blanking on. And I don't even, I like those movies, but they're not my favorite. He had this weird period where he was doing like maybe 2 or 3 features a year. He has an Eclipse box set. And one of them, I believe, is called Sing a Song of Sex. And I was reading in the booklets about how he would construct a film and would use things going on in Japan at the time. Like there was I think it was a Japanese nationalist day, and there was parades and songs, and he was incorporating sometimes real footage, but the real background within the story he was creating. I think this was an opportunity also to do that, to document COVID and to document, yeah, like Dale's attitude towards COVID, towards other people's attitude towards it. And by that, I mean, I think a thing we forget is not just like whether you wear a mask or whether you do not wear a mask, but people would kind of take them off freely. And like we wanted to have that where Dale and Carl are talking, and Carl is like wearing his mask sometimes, even though he's outside, and then would take it off kind of like and then put it back on. That's what people would do. And I'm not judging anyone for doing it, but it is one of those things that's reality and we take it seriously. It's not a joke or anything. And we wanted to capture conversations that I think were happening that didn't cohere into necessarily strong political calls or whatever. It's like we were, as a country, really talking about some sort of socialized healthcare. And then all of a sudden we weren't. And then all of a sudden, this big crisis comes that is very tied to health. And we're not talking about healthcare anymore. It's very weird. But these things still linger in people's heads. And I think about the first conversation with Dale and Carl. They meet in the park and they're chatting, and they're saying like, oh, this woman, she couldn't change her air conditioner, so she died. And there needs to be some sort of like service, this like universal thing where things happen. And it's something we wanted to highlight too, where it's, you know, at the aftermath of some sort of political national cohesion around, we need a better healthcare system. And it kind of, it didn't disappear, but it kind of collapsed in a way. I don't know, I'm just going along with stuff that comes into my head, and I don't think I'm answering your question, but you did ask who Dale is, and I think Dale is pretty much as you see. In which case, I want to say he's very open. Like, he's very open to talk about very painful memories of his growing up with his parents and losing his mom and stuff like that. He can be very, he has opinions and stuff that I don't agree with and don't cohere with my perspective on life. But he's not afraid to say them. He's not afraid to talk, for sure, not afraid to talk. But he is very open as a collaborator, and he's very open with talking about things that would be very difficult for most people to talk about.
I think the thing that I wanted to ask you about Dale is the job. And I think essential worker, yes, but what is the line of work? It kind of very strongly resembles the surge that happened in delivery drivers. Like, for example, Instacart and DoorDash and all of those things became pretty popular during COVID. And those workers were, I don't know if they were seen as essential workers necessarily, but those workers were really braving it because, they were risking their lives literally in doing the work. And what I also found fascinating with the work, and this kind of ties in with the surrealism point, is how the deliveries that Dale does they don't exactly make sense. Sometimes like the things that he's delivering, like there isn't a unity in terms of like he delivers a whole bag of like softballs. Then there's also he delivers a potted plant, I remember. He goes and does a delivery to a graveyard, a cemetery, and all these things. And these are all aspects that on one hand kind of obviously I can see the figurative and the metaphorical value, but the way that you're putting it, that it's actually quite literally his job. So talk about the job. What is the line of work? And he carries very notably this big orange bag that he carries everywhere over his shoulder. It's not quite the size of a tote. It's pretty much his size. Like I don't know how tall he is, but it's like pretty much like half his body is covered by that bag. So it's kind of fascinating that here's this guy with who looks like, and I think that the first thing that comes to mind when I see him is that like this Jesus-looking guy carrying this big bag, and running around everywhere, trying to talk to everybody, and not caring even a little bit about how he comes across, which is again like the aspect that I've seen of so many people, like whether it's an Uber driver, people that you meet at the bus stop, average people in the country. They're just like that forthcoming, that I wouldn't say necessarily friendly, but definitely opinionated, and they want you to know their opinions, in not so much as to like challenge you or win you over or anything, but just to like be heard, so to say. And I feel like he really represents that every man, and also add to the fact that he's a pretty ethnically ambiguous looking guy. Like you don't know what ethnicity he is, although I don't know. I mean, like I honestly don't know. I think like I didn't even care, and I think that it shouldn't even. I don't even want you to answer that question a little bit because it shouldn't matter. So I think the thing that I would like you to answer though is what is the job, and how did this like how much of the deliveries are actually his deliveries that he's doing, and how much is the are deliveries that you decided to throw them in there to fuck around with the script.
So a lot of what Dale was delivering at that time were hard drives. This is for people who are working remote, I would guess, I don't know, editing or something like that. And he was doing a lot of deliveries for Supreme, like people were ordering hype beast stuff, I guess. Never stopped. He was doing that. And I remember we had a conversation once when he was doing deliveries for one of the food deliveries, and someone ordered a McDonald's cookie at midnight. And he had to deliver it, and it was like $20 for like one or two cookies. And it was like not that far of a distance, kind of classic, like something very easily Dale could roll his eyes at. And I thought about that kind of ridiculous thing, and it became an avenue to try and use his line of work to get into more surreal territory, and then use it so that we can have this job where somebody knows that they should visit their loved one's grave site. It's a very spiritual thing, but they just don't have time. Maybe they care, maybe they don't. It's some version of that. But we have a service where someone will go and plant flowers, and the ritual will happen. You don't have to be a part of it. And that idea, I think, was pretty potent. And it was trying to find different things like that where work is stealing all of these things from our life, commodifying them, and assuring you that these rituals, these traditions, all of these things that make life that we've established and said were important, they still exist, and you could still do them. You just have to do them in a different way, and through a different through a different vessel or something like that. And it's hard to say what is real and what's not, because I don't think a lot of these things are that different from the McDonald's cookie order, from someone who was very likely stoned or whatever, but couldn't bother to get up. Like people, especially during COVID, were ordering really strange things just constantly. And it's one of those other things that you think about, that COVID at that time, we didn't know anything. So we thought it was very, I'm not saying it's not dangerous, but we thought it was very dangerous and very contagious. I want to say that there was a moment that I personally read somewhere, so other people thought this too, that if you touch a surface and you touch your face, you could literally die. So that was out there, and then people were ordering not food, but crazy stuff that if we really thought it was this dangerous, then we should have not been, it probably should have just been like, yeah, we order food or whatever. But, in my neighborhood, people were ordering insane stuff. So those thoughts were in my head too.
I think we in the film somewhat portray the normal kind of mundane things that Dale would deliver, and a potted plant like seems crazy, but actually like it's maybe, kind of normal in a way. And some of the stuff that Dale delivers on the daily is actually even stranger than some of the things that are in the film. I mean, the one that he always, talks about anecdotally is like,
Oh yeah.
he would deliver semen from a sperm bank, and that was like a regular job he was doing. And and he of course makes it a whole theatrical performance whenever he tells the story about how he's carrying around this tank that says like live sperm on it or something, but like and how much more ridiculous is that than some of the things that we have in the film. I think it's just an avenue to talk about some of these kind of societal issues that we were able to, and put him in contact with characters that were able to reflect ideas off of him with. Of course, as the film goes on, the deliveries get kind of more and more ridiculous and abstract, and I think that's to some degree meant to be a reflection of his inner turmoil and increasing loneliness and loss of his sense of self to his profession. We wanted to kind of spice it up here and there with some strange deliveries. I mean, at one point he just delivers trash to a polluted beach, and that's obviously something a little bit more expressive on the cinematic side of it, but it's not so far from his reality, no matter how ridiculous the object he's delivering is.
Yeah, and it's also what is too much for somebody. When Mitch is saying that it's reflecting his psyche or whatever, we're also saying, at what point does work get so alien that we say no, or it crushes us, kind of thing. And on the flip side, you had mentioned he delivers like baseballs, and then he ends up playing like not really a game, but they play together. One of the perks of a job which puts you in touch with another person, you do have these avenues where, man, I don't really have a social life. I'm just working all the time, but maybe right now there's a moment here that is, we can bond in ways that I haven't been able to do since I've had to get up every day and make money for someone else so that I can go on, continue living. Let me carve out these little moments when I can. And that's something that we wanted to highlight as well. It's like not only it's not just he's being broken down all this time. It's like there are like moments of something to be that he grabs onto that I think we cherish and maybe don't always think of it that way, that probably could be utilized in a more positive way. Maybe we get accused of being too pessimistic with the film, but I think those are highlights, and I think those are moments that we want people to look to, and those are not all the time, but a lot of time very joyful. I think that's important to show.
It's of course the film is set in New York City. I don't know if he goes into Jersey. I don't know if I can remember scenes where he actually goes elsewhere, but he definitely goes to all the five boroughs, and he takes the ferry, he takes the subway, he takes the bus, he walks, runs, all of those things. Like, it's definitely a year's best, not just because I like you guys, but it's also because it's really important. And I don't think there's been a COVID movie. So I feel like this was a COVID film, for the reason that there was this camaraderie and bonding that you see among people who identify each other. Like he definitely, one of the characters that he talks to is a nurse. I'm not sure who the other characters are, but another character that he definitely interacts with is a woman who's there grieving or like sitting at her grandfather's tombstone. And these are like interactions that he could, and I feel like one or more of those, and of course like one more interaction is with a kid at a bus stop, which was I didn't even know how that was gonna go, but it really surprised me with how good natured it was, because it almost felt like for a second the kid was gonna pick on him or something like that. That it's like it's very easy to have kind of written a scene where Dale becomes the butt of the joke, because he's definitely, to an extent, a chaotic character who should. I mean, in that conversation, it even comes up like the guy asks him how much he makes, and he says like he makes 1,500 or 1,800 bucks or something like that, and he says, "Isn't that below the poverty line?" And then like Dale says, "Nah, it's not. That can't be," and stuff like that. But it actually is, I think. And what's fascinating is that actually kind of blows wide open the optimism of the character, which is in fact like in that scene, the kid doesn't fully, even dismiss that perspective. It actually goes on. The kid is like, fascinated with him, as opposed to wanting him to, wanting to rub it in his face that like, oh yeah, you're wasting your life. And then like, in fact, Dale ends up being the guy who tells him, you don't know what you're talking about. Come back to me when you're like 45 or something like that.
Okay.
So yeah, talk about the specificities of the characters, and definitely the actors that you chose to portray them, and how like these kind of New York moments kind of came about. That all of these characters are all like essential aspects of New York City, sharing these New York moments, but none of them wants to actually like be the king of New York, so to say. Like nobody wants to conquer the world. Nobody thinks that they're the shit. They're all like, just keeping their head down and keeping their nose to the grindstone and doing what it takes to survive. So yeah, talk about how you came about constructing these conversations with these supporting characters.
That's the reaction I've actually gotten from a bunch of people, is like they think about a New York story and they think about Succession, or these stories about people who are at the absolute apex of society and who have money and who are basically, royalty compared to, the plebs like Dale and the rest of us. But and I would challenge that to say that there is a rich tradition of like kind of working class films that take place in New York, and one that Chris turned me on to as a big reference for this was Sean Baker's Takeout, which I actually hadn't seen until I didn't even know about it until Chris had sent it to me. And that was like a huge eye opener for me. And he has a very strong body of work about workers. I mean, largely sex workers these days, but just everyday people. And I think the film needed to exist within that space, because most of the scenes take place just on the sidewalk or in the park or on a bench. It's like, this is where we exist. And I'm sure there are people who are plotting their, hostile takeover of New York from the park bench, but like most people are just out here trying to survive day by day.
In the kind of film that we were making, we were doing this fiction and nonfiction thing and using a lot of people's true personality and thoughts and incorporating that into fictionalized elements to help along the story, or to get across like certain ideas that maybe weren't fully formed in kind of off the cuff conversations that we would shoot, like dialogue scenes, that kind of thing. The person in the cemetery was a friend named Michelle, and she was in our lives at the time, and she was into acting, and she was interesting. So it's like, okay, like we'll find a place for her. So I had a conversation with her, who would you visit at a cemetery? And she said her grandfather. And it's like, oh, okay. So what happened to him? And all that stuff is real. Rich, who plays Carl, and Melissa are friends I've known for a long time. And I thought they would both be interesting. Melissa's not a nurse, but she does cat sit. And I have friends who are nurses, so she spoke to them and what is that like during COVID? Meeting at the bus stop, that was an interesting thing because that came a little bit later. And it's a very hard scene because people do not like when you're super on the nose like that. And here we have this idea where this is going to happen, but we played it kind of pretty naturally. And I think it helps that it's treated kind of like organizing.
Okay.
Like if you think of the kid as kind of like a labor organizer, and you think of Dale as just Dale and play them naturally, like nobody has like a triumphant win or whatever. If anything, like Dale kind of wins, but it's also like if you've ever done any organizing, this is the way to do it. And maybe there's a conversation later, or you're still interacting with this person, you're kind of being like, no, you deserve more, and it's possible to have more. So here's what we do, kind of thing. But we only have this one scene because they're kind of, crossing paths and maybe probably never to see each other again. But that was the key, is to make it as natural as possible and to not kind of stack the deck in either way. And then you also have the thing of like, Dale's not going to give up. Dale's going to push back. And if he sees that you're young, he's not going to let you have it, And that gets at something very real that you do encounter. Okay, like we probably feel more along the way that the kid does. So we don't want that to overpower Dale, and that becomes like the message of the movie or something like that. But we wanted it to play out naturally, and we wanted to be like, yeah, they don't have a fight. Dale is still a very good, amusing guy. So we're going to still hang out with him and still like joke around. And again, it's like if you've done any kind of organizing, this is just how it happens. It's less so like, oh, at Thanksgiving, my uncle said this like really conservative reactionary thing, and I never want to talk to him again. And that is hard. Like that, I'm not telling anybody to just like put up with it for no reason. But in general, these are the kinds of ways that these conversations could and should go. And that's how you kind of can get to a better place. This is the start.
I think the most disarming Dale is when he's like being extremely matter of fact about his personal life and being so candid that you can see in the reactions of the whether it's Carl, right, who plays Carl.
Rich plays Carl.
Rich plays Carl. So Carl, and then the other scene is not even like there's no scene partner, but like it's just him writing a card for his mom and posting it. Even if you had experiences in your childhood with parents that you're not the most happiest with, you would tend to, I feel like, make jokes about it or like be a little tongue-in-cheek in the way that you portray them with somebody else, anybody else that you talk to. But Dale tends to do this thing where he's so sincere that it really cuts you like a knife. And that scene happens where you can see in Rich's reactions that I didn't even, I don't know, was it scripted? The things that he says about his father, especially the way that he concludes that scene. I don't know if I'm spoiling anything by giving it away in a sort of way, but like I think the thing that he says about that he would want to piss on his father's grave, and of course the things that he says about his mother, it just wrecked me. I think like that was the scene that like totally, completely sold me on the film, because I don't know. I think it's just like everything about the character was so earnest and so candid, and like he wears his heart on his sleeve is I feel understatement. And when that scene comes and it's like, can this guy get any more real with you? And he does, and I think like that's a pretty phenomenal thing for any film to achieve, let alone a film where the character is like taking the lead as much as you're pointing out. So was like, were those scenes, especially the most intense ones about his upbringing and so on, were they scripted to an extent? And how do you feel about putting them out? And how did he feel about putting them out?
The thing with Dale is that if you try to tell him to do something too specific, or try to tell him to say something too specific, or even hold it in a way that it's open to camera, whatever it is, like it's not going to happen. And if he'll maybe try, maybe he won't try, but and he'll just kind of fight you on it, but I think that what was so strong about these scenes that you're mentioning, and the way that Chris was able to get the best out of Dale, was that we would just put him in an environment where he was able to be himself and not try to control it or script it, and then using these other talented performers who are his scene partners to kind of subtly guide him in the directions that we wanted him to go, you know. And I know that Chris and the actors and Dale, you know, had rehearsals on the phone kind of before shoots, and you know, there was some sculpting of these scenes, and there was intention with a lot of these scenes, and we knew what we want, you know, what kind of themes and subjects we wanted to cover in some of these scenes. I mean, a lot of them were much more freeform and just like, you know, talk about this for a little bit, yeah, you know, whatever. But I think it was about putting him in an environment and putting him in a space and just rolling the camera long enough, and shooting in a way that was flexible enough that he could really just be himself. And like I said, he is generous with himself, and he's not gonna, you know, hold anything back, and he's ready to share it all. And so that was a learning process for me of like, just be patient with him, you know, and don't try to, because I have a tendency to be like very specific and like, oh, I want to get the angle a little bit lower so you can catch the light from this thing, and Dale just like stand a little bit to the left, no, go back to the right. And it's like you start doing that with Dale and you can't do it. I had to react to him with the camera and give him space to find these scenes on his own, and find these story beats on his own.
Yeah, again, I mentioned this, but Dale is a very generous performer and collaborator, and he is willing to talk about this stuff. He doesn't care. He literally, I think with the dad thing when we first hear, I was like, "Do you want that?" And he's like, "Don't care. We can have it out there. You could put it on YouTube." You know, exactly what he says. It's very interesting because then, yeah, it's something you don't necessarily hear. People are more guarded about, and he's not. And then it allows you, even me when I'm talking, to be more open and vulnerable when you're just having conversation. Yeah, it was just trying to find those moments and, you know, making sure if he's okay with sharing them, if he wants them to be in there, and he was very happy. You know, he really does not care for his dad and really loves his mom, and he sees that as a dedication to his mom, just having that in there. Throughout the whole movie, we are kind of, as Mitch said, reacting towards him, or making a space, and you know, making the performers, everything is kind of a sandbox for him. Like I said earlier, that you write a film around him, but he's very giving. He's very giving, and he's happy to do it.
The reason why your film is something that I consider the year's best is because like there are a couple other films, which one of which is like, you know, very trendy newsmaking, is All We Imagine Is Light, and another film that I would also loop into this conversation is Bird, by Andrea Arnold. And both of these films, and like both, I've never seen anything by Payal Kapadia before, but Payal Kapadia is supposed to be a documentarian, and Andrea Arnold is popular for being neorealist, you know, in the classic kitchen sink realism British filmmaking tradition, working class films like Ken Loach, Mike Leigh, etc. And what is fascinating is that all three of your films tended to have a surreal, magical realist or absurdist kind of, whatever you want to call it, third act, which kind of really elevates the narrative from being the kitchen sink slash slice of life cinema verite narrative to being to delivering the final punch in a way that like actually in Failed State's case, a gut punch, because you kind of see a figurative becoming literal in the way that the state actually fails him. Yeah, and like coming full circle to the conversation about surrealism, talk about how you conceived of the ending. And also, it's fascinating. Without giving too much away, I'll say that the ending also has a metafictional aspect, because there is a filmmaker in the ending who's photographing him, you know, meeting his, I would say, fate. He doesn't die, but like it doesn't end very well for him, I will say. So and he is actually being filmed as well while that is happening, and he is kind of helpless in that position. So it's fascinating to look at it also from the standpoint of U.S. filmmakers filming somebody like him. Almost, are you indicting yourself in the process? There is an element of poverty porn. Kind of allegations that or insinuations that could come up when you're like excessively focusing on a character's struggles, as if to portray a sort of, and to get off on the suffering of the character. So it's almost like a self-addressed kind of scene or a third act that happens. So talk about how you conceived of the ending and the surrealist slash absurdist aspect of it.
It's not even answering questions, it's asking more questions, to myself and to the art form in general. I think that's a thing where if you're making something about labor conditions and humanity and all of those kinds of things, what is the answer? And I'm talking about organizing and stuff and talking about micro budget filmmaking. It does lead me to question and to think about the limitations of the medium and how far you can go, and the responsibilities of artists, of people who watch movies, make movies, that kind of thing. And yeah, it's all of that, just being expressed as best as they can be without, again, me saying this stuff. It's like this mix of these thoughts and then the medium we're using and then everything that came before in the story that we're all telling. I haven't seen those two movies. I don't really watch a ton of new movies. I do find myself writing and thinking in kind of neorealist terms, but then kind of hitting a wall. And maybe it's because it's been decades since Italian neorealism and then neo-neorealism. You get Kelly Reichardt and stuff like that. And it's like, well, I can't do what they did. I don't think I'm as talented or whatever as them. And I do want to look a little further. So what are ways to do that using the medium in a way that maybe other genres of film use the medium, be they horror or experimental or that kind of thing? How do we incorporate all of that? So it's kind of in my mindset.
I did see Bird, which I liked. You're nailing it though. It's such an open-ended story, and it's something that there's life goes on in a way that to abstract it allows us to be open-ended about the ways that we talk about it. And we both knew that this wasn't going to be a movie that had a happy ending, just given the both of our combined states of mind. And we had some back and forth on how pessimistic we wanted the ending to be. And I think that we found a good balance with it, not only in the edit, but just kind of with the intention of what to show and what not to show, because there's discussions of like, do we show him on camera having a mental breakdown on the sidewalk and then hitting his head on the pavement? And it's like, that didn't seem like it was going to actually serve what we wanted to do with this film. We show Chris standing with the monitor and me standing with the camera at the end there, as a way to, if not, express self-awareness, maybe even a little bit of self-critique on the fact that we are harnessing Dale's personal story and in a way claiming it for our own, and we want to be cognizant of that, because to your point, like, it doesn't need to be complete poverty porn and just exploitive of his story, but at the same time he's so emblematic of so much of what we wanted to talk about with this film. So I think we needed to point the finger at ourselves a little bit in cinema, like when everything's all wrapped up with a beautiful bow on top. I'm a little bit unsatisfied. I like being left with more questions than answers, and I think that what this ending attempts to do is leave with a feeling rather than a statement. And there's parts of the film that are directly out of our talking points and our perspectives, and to have a more abstracted ending, I think, gives you something to chew on rather than just something to swallow whole.